You ever finish a book or maybe a movie and just kind of sit back and wonder, how did it do that? You know? Where did that feeling, that deep sense of meaning, actually come from? Well, today we are going to dive into two really powerful ideas that totally flip the script on how we answer that very question.
So, let's get right to it. Is a story's meaning just whatever the author wanted to say? Is it hiding somewhere in the words on the page? Or, and this is where it gets really interesting, is it part of a huge invisible system that connects pretty much every story ever told? The answer, as you'll see, changes absolutely everything.
Okay, so our journey starts in the middle of the 20th century. There was this group of thinkers who were looking at the world around them, and they felt it had become kind of cold and fragmented. They wanted to find a deeper, almost spiritual truth in literature to push back against all that. They became known as the myth critics.
Right, so you had people like Richard Chase and Leslie Fieldler, and they were living in this post-war world that felt dominated by cold, hard logic. For them, a good story wasn't just entertainment, no. It was this vital connection to something way older, way more essential. They believed all literature tapped into a core set of universal myths that could bring meaning back to our lives.
Now, this whole idea of a deep, mythical structure, it got taken to a completely new level by a Canadian theorist named Northrop Frye. He looked at all of literature, I mean all of it, and he didn't just see a random collection of books. He saw a system so organized you could actually map it out, almost like it was a science.
And this was a huge deal. Frye was basically saying that all stories, from ancient poems to modern novels, are part of one giant, interconnected system with its own predictable rules. But, to map something that enormous, you need a key, right? A fundamental pattern that's behind every single story. And for Frye, that pattern was tied to the most universal cycle we all know. Frye's big answer was what he called the mythoi. He argued that our deepest, most fundamental stories all follow the pattern of the seasons. It creates this timeless, endlessly repeating cycle. It's a really elegant and powerful idea, and it all starts, of course, with rebirth.
First up, you've got spring, which is the season of comedy. And we're not just talking about jokes here. This is the narrative of birth, of revival, the victory of the new generation. Think about any romantic comedy where the couple finally gets together against all the odds. Or a superhero origin story, right? A new hero rising. That's the energy of spring.
Then we move into summer, the absolute peak of the year. For Frye, this is the mythos of romance. This is your Lord of the Rings or your Star Wars. We're talking epic quests, idealized heroes, a really clear sense of good versus evil. It's the world of high adventure and wish fulfillment. It's the absolute pinnacle of the cycle.
But, of course, what goes up must come down. So autumn brings us the mythos of tragedy. This is the story of the fall, of decline, of a hero's isolation from society. Think of Hamlet or even Breaking Bad, where you watch a great figure get brought down by their own fatal flaw. It's that unavoidable slide toward decay and the coming dark.
And finally, winter. This brings us the mythos of irony and satire. This is the world you see in shows like Veep or a movie like Don't Look Up. Ideals have totally collapsed. There are no real heroes, and all that's left is to have a cynical laugh at how absurd everything is. It's a world just waiting for rebirth. And that completes Frye's great cycle. It's beautiful, it's predictable, but ultimately it's a closed loop. So what if there was another way to look at all this?
See, Frye's system is brilliant, but it's totally sealed off. It's a timeless, unchanging structure, and that means it can't really explain how meaning changes over time. To break out of that static model, literary theory had to look to a completely different field, the study of language itself, led by this Swiss linguist, Ferdinand de Saussure.
And this brings us to structuralism. Here's its central, game-changing idea. Nothing has meaning on its own. It just doesn't. Instead, the meaning of any word, or any character, or any image comes entirely from its relationship to all the other pieces in the system. It's like this giant web of differences.
Saussure's big insight was that the link between a word, a sign, and the thing it points to is completely arbitrary. It's just a convention we all agree on. I mean, the word tree has no natural, essential tree-ness to it. It only has meaning because we all agree it's not the word bush or rock. Meaning is literally created by difference.
Okay, so this insight, it changes everything about how you analyze a story. The old school way was to look at history, to ask, what was the author trying to say?
But the structuralist approach is different. It basically freezes a text in a single moment in time, and it asks a brand new question. How does this whole system of signs work right now? How do all these parts relate to each other to create the meaning we're getting?
And this leads to the most radical and maybe the most famous idea to come out of structuralist thought. It's sometimes called anti-humanist because it knocks the individual human off the pedestal and focuses instead on the bigger, impersonal systems we're all a part of. And that includes a radical new way of thinking about the author.
You know, we have this really powerful, romantic idea of the author as this solitary genius, the single source of a story's meaning. Well, structuralism just completely flips that on its head. It suggests the author isn't some kind of creator god. They're more like a really skilled DJ, mixing and arranging words and story structures that the culture has already given them.
So the individual author almost dissolves. And what becomes truly important is the impersonal system of language itself. I mean, the author doesn't invent the language, right? It's the language and all its built-in structures that allow the author to write in the first place. The system is always bigger than the individual.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Let's zoom out. We've journeyed from seeing stories as these timeless, universal myths to looking at them as really complex systems that we can actually analyze, almost like a science. And we saw the source of meaning get pulled away from the author's mind and placed into the vast shared structure of language itself.
And that leaves us with one last big provocative thought. If the very language we use and the stories we tell are shaped by these deep, impersonal structures that we all swim in, what does that say about our own individual creativity? Are any of us truly original? Or are we all just becoming masterful arrangers of the pieces that the system